Hello, and welcome back to the second episode of Solutions. Enough complaining, let's fix America. Today is April 28th, 2020, and as promised in the previous video, I'd like to go over some of the things that our government could have done to mitigate the worst impacts of COVID 19, and also go over the reasons why they didn't do these things. First, however, I would like to talk about a disparity between what our government says or governments are doing, like state governments, what they're doing and saying, and what is being seen out in the real world. For me, I have noticed that there are still people dying from COVID 19. But for some reason, some states are reopening. Not all of them, but some states are reopening. Now, this seems to be a disparity between what our state governors are implying by reopening these states and what we see in the real world. And that is one of the things that I would get to eventually in this video series. And that is the fact that we have elected officials that say and promise all kinds of things during campaigns, but then once they win election, those things never seem to ever pan out, and unless you're rich, of course. And you always hear, or they've kind of tapered off on this talking point, but you used to always hear how government moves slow like a cruise ship, so it turns slowly, but it almost always seem to turn like a speedboat for the rich, because policies that impacted the rich always seem to get turned around and made into law, while those things that would impact and be beneficial to the masses never seem to get passed. Things like Medicare for all and other UBI, things that would help people right now in this time of crisis, will never get passed by those people who are leading this country right now. It's like the entire nation of 330 million people is being held hostage by fewer than 1,000 people up in Washington, D.C. And it's even worse than that, because it seems as if those people who are in charge of the different bodies of our government, like Nancy Pelosi, who, she has been rejecting everything, and everybody's been following her lead, and all the representatives have been following her lead. And on the other side, the Senate, it's Mitch McConnell who's been shooting everything down. So kind of our government is being run and ruining the lives of Americans, and it's only three people. It's Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi, and Mitch McConnell, who are pulling all these strings and harming Americans. Now, that leads me to the things that our government could and should have done to kind of mitigate the worst impacts of COVID 19. First off, we could have done a debt jubilee. It's been done in the past. It was done for Germany after World War II. And the reason that was done was because Germany had so much debt and being rebuilt, and there was no way they could ever pay these things back. And as far as America is concerned, we did those things we forgave those debts because we did not want Germany to fall into the hands of the Russians or the Soviet Union at the time. So there were mitigating circumstances for that debt jubilee, but I believe pandemic serves as a mitigating circumstance. And speaking of the pandemic, I would like to talk about the fact that we have some of these states are opening this. So this is basically these governors implying that it's safe to go back to work, whether it's an essential job or a non-essential job. Even that's questionable, what they call essential. In Florida, professional wrestling was deemed an essential service, and that just doesn't quite sound right. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the point. What I was talking about was the fact that I personally continue to hear about people that I know, either directly or only 1 degree of separation. I continue to hear about people dying from COVID 19. The most recent being just yesterday. Um, One of my spouse's students, initially their grandparents died a few weeks ago, and yesterday their uncle died. So people are still dying from this disease. But we have state governments that are reopening the economy to get people back to work, which is something that doesn't eventually have to happen. But it implies that it's safe to go back to work. And this goes to an even deeper point that I've always tried to point out, and something that I wrote in my book, Solutions, and that is that our government and our elected officials seem to say things that uh, fly in the face of what you see in reality. So we have people dying from COVID-19, and then we have governors implying that it's safe and reopening their states and opening up non-essential businesses and just letting people go back to work. There's a problem with that. There's the disparity between what they're saying and what reality says. But we'll get into that and talk about other issues that Americans face, and other instances when government has said one thing and then reality has kind of shown another thing to be true. But let's get to the specifics of COVID-19 and what could have been done. As I said, a debt jubilee could have been offered to the American people so that they don't have to worry about their bills. And at the very least, a moratorium on debts could have been enacted. They could have froze debts until people recovered or the economy recovered. And in that way, that's one less thing that people have to worry about and have to force themselves to go back out in the streets to earn money to pay those debts. Now, another thing that the government should have done and could have done, they obviously could have done it because they did it for the rich. And that is, instead of giving the rich $2 trillion, which not only goes into the pockets of the wealthy and then disappears because the wealthy have no need to spend it, it also, before it goes into an offshore bank account, it causes the money supply to be that much thinner. So if you continue to add trillions and trillions of dollars into add that to the existing amount of currency that's in your economy currently, then you water down the dollar, or whatever currency you're using. In this case, it's the dollar. So for every trillion dollars that they give to soon to be trillionaires, the Federal Reserve is basically making every dollar in your pocket and my pocket worth that much less. We'll get into that as well at some point. I'm just trying to get out, the idea of what the government could have done. So instead of giving $2 trillion to corporations and the rich, that money should have gone into the pockets of every American citizen. Even if they had just given 1 trillion to the people or half a billion to the people, to the point where they could get it instantly, that would have helped the economy, because maybe they couldn't have gone out and gone to stores and things like that, but they could have at least fed their families, paid their rent, paid their car mortgage, their car payment, and they could have basically survived and thrived, and also quarantined themselves. Now, the reason the government should have done this is because if they had done something like that, a UBI, until things get better, or permanently, in my opinion, if they had done a UBI um, when everybody was supposed to be quarantined, people would have stayed home. They would have felt they would have been comforted by the fact that the government is taking care of them and making sure that their needs are being met. But what we have now is people have been home for a while now, unless they get kicked out. Unless a landlord kicks a renter out, which is stupid anyway, because where is he going to find another renter? That doesn't make any sense, to kick people out when everybody's losing their job. So, if the government had guaranteed that people would be made whole by providing money to them in this time of need, then people would have stayed home, and possibly the COVID-19 would have peaked already, or would have flattened out, or just things in general would have improved if people had been more willing to stay home because they understood or believed that their government was going to look out for them. But here we are a month later, and the government hasn't been able to really help people out except for the rich. Like I said, they keep giving them all kinds of money. Meanwhile, those who actually need the money have to suffer and have to start going on protests to get the government to open back up. Now, the reason the government won't do that is because our government is controlled, obviously, by the rich, by donors who say they don't want to give the people the money. Now, this is a wrong-headed thing to do, not only for the masses of people who are going to get upset, but also for the rich, because eventually people are going to start having this view that, oh, the rich are right, the rich are better than the rest of us, the rich deserve more money, and all these other things. People will eventually get tired of believing that, or just not believe it, period. And then the rich will have basically sealed their own fate. I mean, there are people like Nick Hanauer has a TED talk from 2014 where he discusses this. It's called "The Pitchforks Are Coming," and basically he just says, "Look, as FDR said, if we don't give the rich, if they don't give some of the money back that the rest of us have helped them make, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble because people are going to get desperate, and eventually their anger is going to turn to the real source of the problem." The source of the problem has never been nurses, it's never been firefighters, it's never been the police. It's not teachers, it's none of these things, because none of those entities or organizations or individuals control our economy. The wealthy control our economy. Political leaders are controlled by the wealthy that control our economy. So, how is it that teachers are blamed, consistently blamed, and unions are blamed, and none of this makes any sense? I had a discussion with a friend of mine about unions, and he was like, "Oh, but you guys don't like corporations having control over our elected officials, but unions have control over Democrats." It was a Republican Democrat type of argument. And I looked at him and I said, if unions had so much control over Democrats, then why is union membership down so much? Obviously, that argument does not hold water, whereas corporations have more power than ever. I mean, they get laws changed to do things that were illegal so that they can legally do immoral things like corporate buybacks. They were illegal a few years ago, but somehow lobbyists for corporations made it so that they could buy their own stocks back and put people out of work and all of this overseas, where the corporations move overseas. Globalization is not proven to be the boon for the most people in those countries. First off, American manufacturing went to Mexico. Then I remember a few years ago, the Mexicans were complaining because manufacturing was leaving and going to India. So basically, all these corporations do is move from one country to the next where the labor costs are lower, which that's capitalism. That makes sense for the corporation to do that, but it's harmful to the nations that it has an impact on. So Mexico loses a bunch of manufacturing to India, and then India loses it to someone else. And then all of a sudden it comes back into America. Because a few years ago they were talking about how manufacturing was returning to America. And basically what that entailed was that all the new people that were being hired to manufacture cars, that's the main industry you were hearing about, all these new people were getting half as much as people they were standing right next to on these production lines. There were even protests. That's why GM went out and protested, or the employees at GM went out and protested, like 50,000 people or something like that. And then GM tried to cut off their insurance, which it didn't look good. So GM eventually dropped that pursuit. But anyway, getting back to COVID-19, there are going to be a lot of deaths in the second wave that's coming. And this second wave that's coming is not something, I mean, it's speculation, but it's also based on historical data that we do have currently. There was the Spanish flu, which was going on at the same time as World War One, but the Spanish flu actually killed more people than World War One. Even the name Spanish flu is a misnomer because it actually started in Kansas. Um, and the reason it got the moniker Spanish flu was because it was um, because Spain was a neutral in World War One, and their media was willing to present the actual number of cases of the flu, and all the other countries were basically lying about the flu. So Spain had much higher numbers than everywhere else. Anyway, again, I digress. So getting back to what's going to happen with COVID-19 is that all these people are going to go out. There are so many people that are affected now from the first wave that those that haven't died and those who are asymptomatic are going to be going back out into the public. And the second wave, as what happened with the Spanish flu, there were 3 waves, and the second wave was much deadlier than the first wave. And that is going to be the case with COVID 19 because I don't know about you, but I am still hearing about people dying from this disease. And our governors in some of these states are telling us to go back to work and, basically expose yourself to this disease. I mean, there's some people in the media who have actually said, or even the governor, that one from Nevada or from Las Vegas, she said that I think it was her. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've heard officials say that we should be willing to accept a 2 to 3% loss. The elderly should be willing to die for our economy. That is what you would say in a capitalist economy. But capitalism, like a nation, is a man made construct. It was not here 200 or 300 years ago. It does not necessarily have to be here in another 200 or 300 years. There are alternatives to the economy that is known as capitalism because capitalism requires that you put profit above people. There's a saying in capitalism. It goes, if you're not growing, you're dying. And that basically means that if you have a company and it's not getting bigger and bigger and bigger, some other company is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger than you and take you out. And eventually, that may be fine in the beginning, but eventually companies are going to start running out of legitimate ways to become bigger than other companies. And they're going to start turning to immoral and illegal ways and having their lobbyists make them legal either beforehand or after the fact, which is what happened after the big collapse with the banks. A lot of the illegal things that banks were doing are now legal. So those people are nobody's gonna be accountable for causing the destruction that they caused with all their speculation. Anyway, as I've said, there is an alternative to capitalism. We'll get into it, but for now, I'll just tell you one of them. There are alternatives, not just one. One of them is called a resource-based economy. Now, that's your homework. Look it up, and then if you have comments, you can add them into the bottom of into the comments for this video, or when I discuss that topic, you can address those comments about a resource-based economy then. Anyway, thanks for joining me. This is Solutions. Enough complaining. Let's fix America. And I hope you gleans any information from this second episode. Thank you. Goodbye.